When Kirito, the real Black Swordman, I just got a cringe stroke, beat the Gleam Eyes single-handedly, it made no goddamn sense. This is a boss that should take hundreds of players to take down, and he did it himself. What the schnizzle? But then we take a peek at Guts, a human who single-handedly takes down demons on a day-to-day basis. Demons that humans should stand no chance against, and demons that have wiped out human armies single-handedly. But that's not all. Guts has some pretty dope-ass feats against humans as well. This guy took down 100 enemy soldiers simultaneously, not nearly at his strongest, after getting shot with a crossbow. This is a feat never seen before in all of history, before the introduction of firearms. So, to understand my opening statement and the term overpowered, it doesn't mean top 5 in the verse. At this point, he ain't top 5 in the verse. The greatest one versus army fight in history was on a narrow bridge where a single man held up an entire army, killing 40 enemies before he was slain. This was not in an open forest. This was where they can only attack him single file. This man was an unnamed Viking Berserker, and he's made his mark on history. Today we'll be discussing a different, closer to the heart Berserker. One who's even more overpowered than the historic moment I've just mentioned. This is why I initially contrasted him to Kirito, because when Kirito takes on an army, everyone rolls their eyes and how stupid OP he is, and it just makes no sense. But then Guts pulls some massive feat out of his ass, and the fan base is breathlessly choking back tears at the awe of the moment. It's because he's an OP character done right. Done right in so many ways, and I've been hesitant to make this video for weeks now, so I'm gonna try my hand and try to get it right. I've been putting off making content on Berserk altogether because of how much I love that story. I know that doesn't seem like it makes much sense, because making content on something someone loves is really what everyone should be doing. But I've read the Berserk manga a while ago, recently picked it up again to reread it, and oh god, ever since YouTubing, I've started looking at any form of media in a different light. My Overpowered analysis series taught me tons about nuances in character writing, narrative influences, and the psychology of characters, including different character perspectives. And my Anime Decoded videos taught me how to perceive the philosophy behind the actions of a character or series. Feel free to subscribe and check those out. But while I'm aware I'm, like everyone else, in a state of constant improvement, I needed my skills to be honed at least to this point to try to tackle Guts, the greatest serious overpowered main character of all time. The tale of Berserk reveals the darkest aspects about humanity. We see everything in there, and while the demons ain't no saints either, usually it's humanity that really gives off the impression of evil. It's humanity that starts wars, and it's humanity that rapes, pillages, and leaves children for dead. Berserk is humanity at its lowest and worst. And while that is able to be perceived before the rise of the demons in the Golden Age arc with the warring kingdoms and betrayals of allies through carnal sins, that's all just a possible truth in the eyes of the viewers. We're seeing battle. That's where our heads are. Guts is our focal point in a massive world of warring nations. Our own world has seen wars far greater than anything exhibited in Berserk, but by the time the Black Swordsman arc arrives, we full well understand the depths of humanity's depravity. Now that Guts is not focused on war, we can see humanity in its natural state, succumbing to every form of evil. The religious use religion as a guise to do evil, and the non-religious see no reason to avoid evil. It's the bleakest of worlds, a bleak, oppressed world happy to look up to whatever messiah would come and support their lack of justice. The pure antithesis to Guts, and definitely a future prospect on my Overpowered Analysis Done Right series. Griffith is that beacon of hope, misconstrued hope, but hope nonetheless, in a depraved world where there is no other hope to be found. All that being said, none of that is in the spotlight in the slightest. We're looking at Guts. In his journey, while the background everywhere gives us the notion of darkness of humanity, our focus is on something else entirely. Guts sees humanity for what it is, despite making no moves to save the day. He has his own ambitions in mind, and almost everything we see him do throughout the Black Swordman arc is done due to necessity. Most humans and demons he comes across are obstacles to his goals, so therefore, while understanding what they are, he makes no means to change them. Guts isn't out to be a hero for the public to admire. Yes, when he is admired, it feels amazing for the fan base. Our boys finally get some of that clout, but to Guts himself, it's completely meaningless. And he doesn't do the flexing thing we see in many other protagonists.
I'm level 78. I got 14,500 HP. My battle healing skill auto-regenerates 600 points every 10 seconds. We could stand here all day and we wouldn't get anywhere.
Guts discarded clout just like he discarded honor, because none of that is real. It's only a state of mind due to one's current perspective. So by the time the Black Swordman arc arrived, Guts saw everything human eyes can see. He saw depravity within humans, he saw the essence of evil within demons, and he sees where he stands in the greater world he inhabits. Where we stand now, Guts' eyes only see the truth. Fighting a battle honorably is for fools. It's a naive tactic to escape from the reality of the acts he's committing. It's inherent dishonesty. Becoming enthralled by Guts because he saved their asses by demon hordes is gracious and it's appropriate, but it isn't truly appreciated. It's just a fleeting feeling. In reality, it's dishonesty. Using religion as a guise for either murder or pacifism because of cowardice is not service of God, it's dishonesty. But while Mosgus is a massive sadist, he'll lie to himself and to the world that it's the will of God. And the priest dude that was in the troll arc was a massive coward. He blames his cowardice as God's will for pacifism. And the list goes on to every human that opposes Guts throughout the entire series. Marrying Farnese, claiming it's love, while it's secretly political tactical gain, and so on. The world cackles with dishonesty around our protagonist, and it's not just shown in mere humans. The Berserk manga is black and white, an overwhelming amount of black and white, and that's one of the reasons I don't believe we'll ever see an appropriate adaptation. Guts grew to the point where he sees things in black and white, as does Griffith, but in complete opposite contrast to Guts' ideals. Guts' outward character design is one of excessive savagery and entrenched in deep, shadowing, and overdone black, like no other good guy, I guess you can call him a good guy, in fiction. Yet, despite the evil-seeming exterior, inwardly, he's the purest of protagonists. On the flip side, we have Griffith. Outwardly, he's the most serene, elegant, borderline, angelic character design ever, and he's regarded by the entire world as the Messiah. He's someone who's committed the most atrocious of acts, and he's the most evil being in this world, and one of the most evil beings in fiction. Despite that, that is not the message he conveys to the world while he rallies up his army and his devout followers. Judging either Guts or Griffith by their cover is a very bad move. Griffith at this point in time is living a facade, bathing in false outward appearances, while Guts discards appearances and embraces the beast that resides within, that all of us tries to suppress. Griffith is the antithesis of Guts, as I've mentioned before, because his entire being is composed of and thrives off dishonesty and falsehood, while Guts, to prove my earlier phrase, only sees truth and reality. This is one of the major themes of Berserk throughout, despite me never really seeing anyone talking about it, and I will get back to it later after I stress the importance of Guts' humanity. Guts does not talk a lot, and he does not monologue, yet his resolve and psychology becomes more and more clear as the story progresses, because Guts has the worst life ever, and it's a life none of us will hopefully ever need to even dream of getting close to experiencing, but he remains as one of the most strangely relatable fictional characters ever. It's almost paradoxical, but here I believe is why. More than almost any other character from almost any other story, Guts is so human. On a visual perspective, reading this masterpiece of a manga, we're reminded day in and day out of his feeble state as a mere human, constantly sworn by the allies of darkness that we don't know how he will defeat. He even turned down the Demon King of Kushan's invitation to ally up against Griffith to retain his humanity. Guts will maintain humanity by all costs, but this so far is just a superficial glance at the mechanics of Berserk's narrative. If you take a look at the eclipse, the turning point of our story, the two survivors were Guts and Casca. I hear a lot of people talking about this moment and how each of their respective philosophies were massively affected, but very differently. Casca was violated mentally and physically, watching a world she didn't know existed devour all of her closest friends, and experiencing a side of Griffith, her savior, she wouldn't believe existed, as he raped her in front of the one she loves. She was destroyed, mentally, physically, emotionally. Her mind was completely overloaded by the situation at hand, and all this resulted in her losing her mind past the Golden Age arc. The issue I'm getting to is that I hear a lot of people claiming something very similar happened to Guts. People say he was also emotionally and mentally shredded, and therefore, in turn, he shredded all sense of his morality and all lingering humanity. On this point, I vehemently disagree. This is precisely where Guts grabbed hold of his humanity, embracing his human pain of loss and succumbing to the human sin of wrath. In this case, it's a righteous fury and it's a will for revenge. Attributes possessed solely by humanity. This is also the precise moment where, again, in perfect contrast to Griffith, Griffith completely discarded humanity, literally sacrificing it for power. Guts was intended to be one of these sacrifices and was therefore branded with a mark that operates as a double-edged sword, summoning demons to slay him and in turn warning him of said nearby demonic presences. But most of all, it's a constant reminder of the gruesome, unavoidable fate as a sacrifice. It's a fate that Guts fights against every moment of his life, night or day, completely and constantly overridden by monsters in every corner of the world. Once his eyes have been opened to the truth and the seemingly infinite darkness of the world he inhabits, the logical choice would be to surrender and to just let his endless suffering with no hope in sight just end. But fam, he's a human, more human than any other, and human emotion and decision-making are not governed by statistics, they're governed by willpower and determination. It's these little human attributes that possess the only ability to grapple with fate itself. Oh, and Guts does. Knowing that a moment of faintness of heart will destroy him, he fights fate with all his might. The idea of adrenaline is pushing past one's limits. No machine can trap into this adrenaline power, no matter how advanced this machine will be. Because machines operate through statistics, probability of survival, and they'll make decisions that make sense under these principles. The only way to tap into this deep pocket of undefined strength is with the power of emotion, a trait possessed by human beings, and the only way to truly beat the odds, as it were. And this is the unfathomable resolve Guts has, pushing far beyond his breaking point, which is how he's constantly keeping his dark destiny at bay, with the ultimate and unfortunately unappreciated gift every human possesses: the gift of being human. If you've been by this channel long enough, you know I have an issue with villains that are evil for the sake of being evil. Well, I have a very similar issue with good guys that are good for the sake of being good, which is why Shiro Emiya from Fate Stay Night is one of my least favorite protagonists of all time. Guts does not have this flaw, not by a long shot. In fact, to put in simpler terms, this flaw I'm referring to is the flaw of being perfect and having a perfect ethical and moral standing. Guts is flawless because of his flaws. Saying that there is a flawless human is a paradox, because being flawed is what makes us human. There's one scene that encompasses a lot of what I'm trying to convey here. Right after Guts began his journey with Casca, it was rather difficult to control her due to her severe lack of self-awareness. So, long story short, she manages to run away, and then the frustrated Guts found his former lover, and his inner carnal beast decided to kick in overdrive, and he started getting intimate with her. Rather against her will, because, as I've mentioned, she has no memories and she has no presence of mind. The manga shows the beast within him fighting for control to succumb to its natural urges and rape Casca, with the image being this shadowy beast, the representation of his 7 deadly, very human, carnal sins, in this scenario being primarily lust, as it closes its massive jaws around Casca's breast, until at last, Guts breaks free from this delusion, only to find his bite marks where that beast's muzzle clamped shut. Guts held himself back from committing a terrible act, an act without witnesses that would never get him reported to the cops, but it was a terrible act nonetheless. He held himself back, but he did not completely snuff it out. He left his mark that he did do wrong. He knew he did wrong, and he felt terrible about the wrong he did. He isn't a perfectly just being, and he has desires that anyone else does, but he works hard to do what's right, or at least what he defines as right. This moment alone is enough reason to prove Guts' blatant humanity. It's his greatest weakness, and it's his greatest strength, but it's absolutely his greatest attribute. He isn't a human that became a monster to fight other monsters. He's a human that's constantly pushing himself to his fate-defying limits, to the point that he can overpower monsters. And that's how the series looks at him throughout. From the demon's perspective, this man can't be human. And from the perspective of the humans he saves, wow, he saved us. Look at him fight these monsters. This man's a monster. It's only the ones closest to him that see him as the ultimate human, a being trying his hardest to retain his humanity, and a being that bears scars from every battle he faces, bringing his past experiences with him to his next experience, just like every human does in their mind. But believe it or not, that's how we look at him too. Consciously or subconsciously, every viewer understands this, and honestly, that's what makes his tale so relatable, and that's what makes his tale so powerful. Throughout the Golden Age arc, we take place in a normal-seeming world, and we have a normal-seeming setting. The arc focuses on Guts, an outcast with a terrible past, where he at last joined a family, made friends, found someone to truly look up to for the first time, and find someone to love. He wins his battles and grows a name for himself and his group, but looking back after what I've established to be his current defining character traits, being his focus on honesty of reality as opposed to perceived honesty. For example, using deceit in battle is more honest to a battleground than believing in honor, an actual non-entity to mask the horrific actions committed, and secondly, his striving towards retaining his humanity, i.e. the fate-defying power of individuality. These are his two greatest weaknesses, though, in the Golden Age arc, and that's why they were overcompensated thereafter to create the unrelenting Black Swordman we know today. No, I mean the real Black Swordman. Editor! Thank you. But in the Golden Age arc itself, there were two defining moments, at least to me, that changed my perception of Berserk's entire narrative. The first was Griffith's statement that anyone without their individual ideals and merely follow my ideals ultimately cannot be my equal. This line is incredibly powerful, but here's why I found it so internally and inherently important to the entire narrative. Before joining the Band of the Hawk, Guts had given up on humanity. In large part, it's due to his abhorrent upbringing. He had no friends, no companions, no future, and no dreams. He was living a soulless life for the sake of getting stronger, getting his next adrenaline boost, getting his next meal, and as it says in the manga itself, living for the sake of waking up the next day. The Band of the Hawk changed all that entirely and gave him both a family and a purpose. In turn, it also gave him someone to love, namely Casca, and it gave him a best friend, namely Griffith. The way Guts and Griffith were perceived by the viewers at this point were as the ultimate duo and best bros of anime. Well, except maybe Vash and Wolfwood, but that's for another video. I mean, the fanfic writers may have taken this a step further than just bromance, but my point here is that Griffith's statement of the only people deserving of his respect are people with their own ideology destroyed the ultimate broship we perceive. Not in the sense that they are bros no more, but this statement retroactively uprooted any comradeship between the two. We're coming from Guts' perspective, so we saw them as friends, but if we were to be seeing the greater picture, the actual truth of the story, it would result in Guts using Griffith as his support structure because he had nothing without the Hawk, and in turn Griffith viewed Guts as an extremely handy tool. That's the power of perspective, because we only knew Guts' mind, while Griffith remained a massive enigma, and still remains one until this very day. This statement shattered our perception of Guts' individuality, and shattered our perception of his freedom as a human. Griffith never lied to him directly, but he was happy and eager to welcome him to the collective ideology of the Band of the Hawk, despite Guts never being lied to outright. And despite everything in the physical world being completely open on the table, mentally, Guts was deceived thoroughly as far as his entire belief system, individualistic humanity and facaded reality, his two later most defining characteristics. But in this scene, they were passively destroyed. It was his own wounded psychology that blinded him to the reality of his lack of individuality, so he left the Hawk. These weaknesses would never plague him again. Well, at least not passively, because the second major narrative-shattering moment of Berserk's Golden Age was obviously the eclipse, the Ragnarok of Berserk history. So, this is around when Guts started realizing, hey, you know, after watching Griffith sacrificing all my friends, he's a bit of an ass. Especially because Griffith cemented these two extremely powerful ideals as a complete opposition to Guts' core. He performed the ultimate deception to the fam of the Hawk, and he sacrificed every shred of his humanity to the point that even in his superficial narrative, he became a demon. Yes, he did all this for this future. It's a future that I'm definitely going to be covering in a future video because Griffith's philosophy is freaking fascinating, but this is Guts' analysis, and Griffith will definitely get his own eventually. But funnily enough, this sacrificing of humanity, as well as this ultimate deception of reality, are the same two ideals that Guts steadfastly grips onto post-Golden Age arc. The first defining moment of the Golden Age trampled these ideals passively due to Guts' lack of perception, but the second moment was far more active. It solidifies the entire series, painting the future pages in overpowering extents of black and white, basically full circle to how I began this analysis. So now as a final point that encompasses exactly all the points I've been trying to defer from the series for this video, the reality of any human is that we scar. We scar externally, but even worse, we scar internally. The definition of a scar is a wound that will remain with you eternally, and that's the same for everyone. However, there are many different ways to deal with the suffering that is a result of said scar. So Guts, as the series progresses, continues to scar externally. He lost an eye, which is irreplaceable, and he feels that loss daily in every task. Not that he'll complain about it, because complaining is against Guts' character. Remember? Steadfast grasp of reality? Complaining is purposeless and therefore out of the question. He's lost an arm that he was forced to sever himself, and it's a looming sense of futility because even in chopping his own arm off, he was powerless before Griffith and the acts being committed before him. But also, he's upgraded since then. A horrible scar of losing an arm was replaced with a demon-killing machine, an iron arm with a crossbow machine gun and a cannon. The other purpose of scars and wounds from the past is not only to make the most of the situation that's befallen you, that's obvious, but it's actually to try to use your past burdens to your greatest possible advantage. And third would be his physical scarring due to the nature of his Berserk armor. The scars are an undying message that he's alive another day, and without these scars, he would be dead. That aside, the Berserk armor is likely my favorite power-up in all of fiction, because it thematically resonates with Berserk's entire narrative. Many of the members of Guts' posse that visited a certain witch at a certain time were giving magic weapons to assist them in battling hordes of demons, and almost all of these weapons contained magical properties. That makes sense. And now the wielders had magic powers, at least to an extent. Whether it was a fire dagger or a sword that can shoot scythes of air, almost everything could do something. Well, all of them could do something except for one, and that would be Guts' Berserk armor. It couldn't do any of that. It couldn't let him fly like others with him, and despite this, the Berserk armor is still considered the most powerful and most dangerous. Taking its name very literally, this armor makes you go berserk. Its helmet takes the shape of the beast within your heart, and the wearer loses his sanity due to an uncontrollable bloodlust. The armor will pierce the skin and continue to hold together the wearer's tattered bits, so he can keep fighting despite continuing to be torn to shreds by both his opponent and the armor he's wearing. And it also numbs the wearer's pain, so they don't realize how terribly they're destroying themselves due to lack of this pain and lack of presence of mind. Putting on the helmet transforms you into the ultimate killing machine, where your natural senses will not stop you, and where your latent power is completely engorged upon with a fury. This is why I'm mentioning it in this video though. No, I'm not going off tangent, but it's extremely pertinent to my cause. The Berserk armor unlocks your ultimate human potential while dampening your natural human reflexes to stop yourself from reaching this point of brutality. Pain stops someone from going nuts, as does their mentality. Both of these are numbed by the armor, while it unlocks your ultimate human potential. This armor is inner wrath incarnate. So while everyone else is using their magic weapons, Guts is fighting the full force of his humanity as well. The terrifyingly brutal aspect of the armor in itself is incredible, but even more so is how it plays its role in the greater narrative. In the beginning of the video, I mentioned a Viking Berserker who had the greatest feat in history. As far as one man against an army, well, surprisingly enough, Viking Berserkers are known to be incredibly fearsome, especially because they would drug themselves to limit pain reactors and numb fear, while bringing out their reckless wrath within. The Berserker armor is the essence of Guts' inner suppressed being, a being that can now finally be tapped into. But these are all physical scars. Scars Guts carries with him every day. They're important and integral to his current state of being and state of mind. So of course, all the more so regarding his emotional scarring, the world being demoralizing is nowhere near the ballpark of how ravaged he's been mentally. He's literally been to hell and back, to the point that the travesties he witnesses daily during the Black Swordman arc hardly faze him. He carries the mental burden for the infinite suffering he's seen and he's felt, and carrying all that with you is what shapes a human. A human is made up of DNA and cells, but humanity is made up of integrity, morality, and the shape they've been molded into by life-altering experiences. Guts himself goes through all three of these trials every day of his life. And it may be on a slightly smaller scale, but so does every one of us. We can blind ourselves to reality to avoid pain like so many do, but we can accomplish far more than any defined limit set for us. And we're facing small-scale defining experiences that'll be emotional scars, for good or bad, every moment of our waking life. But to get back to the initial point, despite Guts being insanely powerful and brutal, and despite Guts having literally the worst life ever, he's one of the most relatable protagonists to me of all time, because he has flaws. He has internal battles. He has drastic personality-shaping experiences. Yet he grasps his past, he bolts toward his future, he's proud of his humanity. As he grapples with his defined destiny, he never lets go of what's real. Guts is the most relatable protagonist to me of all time, because he's the most human main character I've ever seen in any story ever. And his story is just a larger scale version of everything that happens to us. Beauties and gentle beauties, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this analysis video. It was a pretty long one. Honestly, I'm pretty proud of it because I haven't really seen anyone talk about guts to such degree. I hope you enjoyed it too. If you'd like other analyses and satire stuff, feel free to subscribble and hit the like button so there's another like on the video. Also hit the bell button if you want to subscribe, because subscribing is no longer done through the subscription button alone. Thanks, YouTube. Link in the description to my Twitter if you'd like to follow me there, to my merch if you're interested in supporting the channel, and to my Patreon if you're super interested in supporting the channel. Speaking of, huge thanks to the Patreon supporting me already. The 6 Swag Coggers, Q, Tyler Schumacher, Zindergarten, Axel, Colton, Scott, and an anonymous member. The 2 Lord Tweakers, Gavin Anderson and Large Blab. And the 4 God Usopp rank, Zachary Wheatley, Dark Element, JD Fincher, and Ezedric. Thank you all so much for contributing. The channel really needs the support, and anyone who donates anything is invited to the Discord server. So yay, that's also a plus. Anyway, aside, to anyone who watched this video, I really appreciate your time. Let me know something in the comments. You know, either some in-depth shiz or some stupid sarcastic memes. I love them both. Go for it. But more importantly than any of that, remember, each of us are human and we each have our own individuality, and that's why you gotta stay weird, fam.